Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hey guys, welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. I'm your host, Nectar. On this week's show, I had the pleasure of speaking with Ashkan Karbasfrooshan, CEO of WatchMojo. I have to say it was a very special episode for me and a real honor. Ash is one of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know, yet he's the most humble. He's won the Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award in the media entertainment category. He has a track record of launching, building, and scaling content companies. His previous company was sold to News Corp, and his current company, WatchMojo, really bootstrapped to becoming one of the biggest YouTube channels that exist today, top 10 globally, with 15 million subscribers and 1.6 billion minutes of watch time, just like absolutely stunning numbers. We had a wide-ranging conversation on how he founded WatchMojo and how he grew it to 15 million subscribers on YouTube. The nuclear winter he went through, he had many years of struggles and why he didn't quit. We went into his literary influences, the next big bets, which include Facebook video and how he's working with them. And then he has some really good advice for entrepreneurs to follow and the trends that they should be betting on. He was very generous with his time and his insights. He's incredibly humble despite having built one of the most successful media brands on YouTube. And I think that you'll learn a lot. Enjoy the show. Ash, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure to connect and see you again. I guess as a first question, maybe going a little deep to start with, has history taught you anything about business? I know that you're a huge fan of history, and I'm as well.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially the ones that launch tech, software, or hardware ventures, they are quick to look at, Bill Gates, of course, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, the Google guys. So I obviously take a lot from those individuals, but I personally spent a lot of time, and if truth be told, I wish I would have researched the following people sooner, talking about the William Randolph Hearsts, talking about the Newhouses who launched Condé Nast, even Walt Disney, Rupert Murdoch. Not saying these are people whose, moral compass or, ethical parameters are people that I want to emulate. But I absolutely think that for WatchMojo, we recognized and took advantage of the latest media, which was online video, and the powerful platforms, which were not like a printing press, but the YouTubes of the world, to adapt the art of storytelling, which is ultimately what I've always liked, having published 3 books and written thousands of columns. So for me, the challenge was online video and how can we go ahead? So absolutely, I think, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years reading the biographies of those media entrepreneurs and executives, because WatchMojo, I feel like after 10 years obviously, as much as I think we're still the unknown scrappy startup, that's a relative statement, compared to Vice or Walt Disney, we're unknown in some ways. But, on YouTube, we've obviously built a large presence, and to say that we are unknown it sounds weird. So as I think of like where we're going to go in the next 10 years, or multiple decades, I definitely look at those companies in terms of how they were able to take one property and one brand and then build a media empire around it.
Is there any overarching lesson that you see that's a common theme across, those success stories?
Well, there's 2. I think if you look at more the individual versus the organization, I personally, when I started WatchMojo, I was doing things like producing shows where I was the host, or being like the face or the spokesperson of a given company. I made a conscious decision not to be yet another like vlogger. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just felt like, well, that's not really going to be a sustainable thing. I may find it interesting for a year or 2, but knowing myself, I said, and look, for every one successful vlogger, there's a million who just don't connect with audiences, right? So I really was at a point in my life, being 27, recently married, where I said, okay, it's kind of over the next 10 years, I know that I'm going to be more interested in building like an organization, a team where, you share the spotlight. If anything, you create other stars. So there is an element now in terms of management of, are you a micromanager and how much of the details do you care about? William Randolph Hearst, for example, used to used to methodically look at every detail, like how wide the columns should be, the font, and like the choice of titles. I learned, reading Built to Last, a book that we're usually encouraged to read in business school. I learned that, like, look, you're better off helping people build clocks instead of just giving them the time all the time. So one of the things I learned was like, yes, I'm passionate about everything. I want to win ethically without cheating and whatnot, but you can't worry about every detail. You absolutely have to be okay, and you got to pick and choose your battles. You got to ask yourself, is this the mountain I want to die on? And most of the time the answer is no. And you want your team to feel like, just this morning, on an email thread, I was having a discussion with a colleague, and I think a lot of guys would have just said, look, let's do this. I want to do it. But I was like, no, the guy's right. He has a point. And I just outlined why his point was better. But even if I maybe would have in another scenario said, I think I'm right, you gotta be able to let him go, So from a management and micromanagement perspective, I realized, I don't really want to be like William Randolph Hearst, especially in his case, like he kind of was using it to channel his views. And I mean, for WatchMojo, we rank stuff. I may think that Batman is better than Superman, but I'm not going to force that upon my team. We created a system, a method to the madness where we can kind of discuss. And if the prevailing thought is someone else's, absolutely. So Hearst, I definitely don't, say I don't emulate how much it was about him. Someone else like Rupert Murdoch, he'll have nothing to do with one of his businesses, but then he'll just take an interest in something, and then he'll just walk in unannounced and roll up his hands and get involved with something. So then, it's just, you kind of pick and choose, and you see how these great, entrepreneurs built up these companies, and then you kind of apply it to your business and to, frankly, the reality of your times,
Yeah. And you mentioned a few interesting things. So like one of them is choosing which mountain to die on. And in one of your books, the 10-year overnight success, which is a great title. You can tell that you went through this like nuclear winter of many years and many battle scars before any kind of public success. I guess my question is, what kept you going through that time, right? When you didn't have the traction, you didn't have the metrics to kind of prove it out. What made you kind of stick through the dip, to quote Seth Godin, and keep going?
Sure. So I think it does boil down to persistence. There's a famous quote by former President Coolidge that just basically says, nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not, there's nothing more than, educated derelicts who don't do anything. And I do think persistence is the fundamental thing you need in life, in sports and business. Like everybody else is more or less thinking of accomplishing the same things as you may be. But if you're not as, more persistent than anybody else, you're going to fail. Now, bear in mind, I had lived, not just as a student of history, read about, but I had lived through first the post NASDAQ bubble bursting nuclear winter of 2001 to about 2004. What I learned about that was that in those periods, I mean, even in boom times, I tend to think more about just the blocking and tackling and the real tangible stuff instead of like the hype and fads. But I felt that especially from 2001 to 2004, to try to make noise and tout vanity metrics wasn't going to work. So when I was at my old company, Ask Men, that's when we put our head down and we just built a business, created a lot of content that audiences liked, struck a lot of partnerships. We leveraged the fact that, hey, nobody else is going to be investing in digital media content, so let's fill that vacuum. And I realized that, hey, there's always a regression to the mean. What is down goes up, and what is up goes down. So by 2004 and 5, we found ourselves in a good spot, and I feel like another company could have decided to stay solo or play differently than sell as Ask Men did, first to IGN and then to News Corp. But having experienced that, when I started WatchMojo in 2006, it was very different. It was kind of a, wow, the internet is back. Video is the future. There was a first wave of .com video producers before in the late 90s, Pop.com from Steven Spielberg being one of them. And then in the lean years of the post-NASDAQ, there was a second wave, like the Heavies and the Mania TVs of the world, which had all by now been kind of running on fumes. We, along with Revision 3 Next New Networks, were part of this third wave of online video producers. And then we got nailed right away with the economic meltdown, propelled and accelerated by Lehman and the mortgage crisis, but which affected everybody. So again, what I learned was, hey, maybe just because I'm an eternal optimist, I said, hey, this is actually an opportunity. All these companies are going to scale back. Us being in Montreal, we could kind of, weather the storm in our own little bubble and just produce a lot of content, find out, listen to partners and viewers and figure out what they want. Now, what happened is in that kind of period, we also realized that, well, look, if we are going to succeed, trying to, serve 20 constituencies wouldn't make sense. And that's when we decided really to go for the independent route of focusing on the end viewer, like the consumer, the viewer, and not say, well, Yahoo likes our biographies and Hulu likes our film top 10 lists and, AOL likes our lifestyle clips. We just said, you know what? We ourselves were spending a lot of time on YouTube. And we feel like the kind of content that we're best at is infotainment, factual, research-based. And to do long-winded, articles, well, nobody's going to care. It's a short attention span. But you know what? We like lists and we like saying that A is better than B. And so we really focused on that. And it was something that we were passionate about, as we are today, because that's what we found ourselves debating at the water cooler and during lunchtime. So we just said, hey, let's just do this as the main content.
So what do you think is the part of your personality that made you have that, what's the word, stick-to-itiveness, right? Like, is it something you got from your parents, or is it something that, something from your childhood that just said, I'm not going to friggin' give up?
Come play soccer with me and you'll get the answer. No, I mean, look, I like to think, again, I've learned also a lot about like perspective, optics, perception. So I personally think I'm a very kind of like service-oriented, competitive, but try to be fair person. So if you draw those three circles, what you get is someone that just has this crazy amount of drive, which I would say externally comes across a bit less, because as you get more, as you do have some success and you start to gain traction, you don't want to go with what like the Uber guy, what happened to Uber's founder, and we're not comparing WatchMojo's success and scale to Uber at all. But I think there does, you can't wear your ambition on your sleeve. You can't be so driven that you push the grandma out of the way, whereas when you're the scrappy startup that really is losing money, it's okay to go in the corner and be a bit more competitive and whatnot. So one is I did have this insane amount of drive, but I also, when I joke, well, it's true, but I go, when we were insolvent and practically bankrupt, we still kind of were very ethical and fair with suppliers and employees and like the overall, community that we worked in. We paid our bills. We didn't stiff anybody on bills. We gave, our team full-time salary positions with paid vacation, even though, well, I didn't have 2 dimes to pay for my own vacation in the early years. And then the last one was the element of service, which comes from just always wanting to make sure people are happy and comfortable. And that could be maybe because even though I'm Canadian and I've grown up here all my life, my parents were from Iran, and Iranians, if you ask anybody, they'll tell you. They go like, they'll take you in their house and they'll give you everything, and but they'll go to your house and they won't want anything, Yeah. So I do see some. So yeah, I think it's just this element of like trying to be fair, wanting to win, and making sure though that you don't win at any cost, where you're in, if I could use the word, an a-hole with those around you, where you still want to be fair and create a positive environment.
Mm-hmm. So to give us a sense today of WatchMojo's scale, like maybe give us a high level, like, number of views, number of, employees, like how big is the company today from where you, compared to where you started from, obviously from zero?
Yeah. So, when we started, it was, my wife, Christine, and I in 2005, we're both kind of like disillusioned with where we were working at respectively. And it wasn't like we sat down and said, hey, let's start a business together. It was definitely not that. It was more like, yeah, like we're going to get married soon. AskMen, I think, is starting to be on the radar of some people. It'll get acquired. I could stick around, or I might, have a little bit of resources to start something. And so we kind of realized that, like, we both really like media and content. And I was very much into, say, like, we both like these verticals, but I was really into, like, music, history, business, movies, and she was really into like entertainment, fashion, travel. And we kind of said, okay, we know a lot about all these categories. And, I think between like, let's say my sales, marketing, content side and your administrative, organizational, common sense, practical perspective, we kind of mesh well. It was never like we never sat down and did a SWOT, but I mean, we did have conversations that we kind of realized we may be able to actually work together because we also compromise. We're both like second kids, so we always had an older sibling. And I think that says a lot. Like having an older sibling generally means there's this other person that sits on you and you have to kind of like become your own person and get along with someone older. But then I was also concurrently, I was always very much of a content guy. Even when I studied finance, I was like, so for us, it was like, let's start this. But neither of us had video experience, I've shot videos, but they're not professional. So we realized right away we needed people that were actually in communications and broadcasting and whatnot. So we reached out to Raf, and Raf was, a guy who I'd worked with when I was producing some radio shows. And then we kind of said, okay, we need a few other bodies. And it was like Kevin and Derek. So we were kind of 5 people who started off not having any idea what we were going to do, so to speak, like in specifically, but we kind of knew the world is moving towards video. We like storytelling. It seems like a natural fit. So it was 5, and then we added a few more bodies, but we were like 5, 6, 7 people for, from 2006 till about 2008. 2008 and 9, we added a few more bodies, but then we were 10 until 2012, 13. Then 2012, 13, once we really focused on YouTube and our subscribers went from 10,000 subscribers to 100,000 and then 1 million and then 5 million. And then now we're at 15 million on the core channel. We then really blew up from, let's say 10 to about 50 people in the Montreal office, mainly in production, mainly in editorial. And then we've since added another 10 people in New York, London, LA. So I'd say overall we're probably close to 60 people full time. We also have a network of 100 freelancers, and there I think it's a balance between wanting to give your audience the content that they're asking you with maintaining quality, avoiding that things don't slip through the cracks, which every company as you get bigger you have to deal with. And I mean, in terms of the channel, so the channel does 15 million. If you add the Spanish, Miss Mojo, all the other channels, we're at 18 million. In a given month, we'll do 1 billion minutes of watch time, which is a big number. And we'll do anywhere from 200 to 300 million views around the network, with the core channel still being the biggest one. But, Spanish is growing really fast. I mean, YouTube is such a global platform. I'll be honest, there's zero money in the non-English speaking markets, but we never make decisions based on money. In fact, I tell entrepreneurs, I'm like, if you see an opportunity in the near term that you think is a profitable one, by the time you set up your product, your strategy, and you scale, that has evaporated. So I'm like, others are chasing that. It's like economics 101. I go, others are going to chase that short-term opportunity and erode profits. So you have to think of in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where do you see the opportunities? And that's really the challenge of entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. When I started WatchMojo, I thought we were late to video. I was like, man, we're so late to online video. But what I realized is we were so ahead. And I think it's okay to be ahead by a few years. It's okay to be a couple steps ahead of the marketplace. Where I think you kill yourself is when you're like many steps or like a decade ahead. And that's where you see a lot of companies burn a lot of venture capital because they're just way too premature. Like
pets.com. And
pets.com is an extreme example because you could argue, it's funny because I'm sure Amazon today probably ships a hell of a lot of pet foods and whatnot. But just think of online video. The things that we are doing, pop.com and pseudo.com tried to do in the late 90s, but then you had no bandwidth, hosting cost a fortune. Consumers didn't even think of watching videos, and there wasn't that many people online to begin with. So those companies who were trying to do storytelling in video form were really ahead of the game. Where really I think the things changed was with YouTube. With YouTube also being part of Google and they could absorb the cost and the intricacies of the tech, then they also gave you 1 billion viewers that were actually viewers. The challenges that traditional media companies have, especially those that are in print, is, their viewers are reading. It's like Pavlov. They've been conditioned to read articles. So they're not going to turn around all of a sudden and watch a video because you just slap a video on a page, So we also, I talk about persistence, but make no mistake about it. There's an absolute, luck and timing factor that goes into it as well.
You mentioned, how you come up with strategy, like looking for those, blue ocean, so to speak. How do you set strategy at WatchMojo? Is it a formal process? Is it in the shower? Like, just curious as to how you think about it for your company.
So Jack Welch, the former chairman and CEO of GE, published a book. His autobiography was called Straight from the Gut. So I read that around the time I was finishing my finance degree at Concordia. I read that over the Christmas holidays when I was looking for a job. And I that really resonated with me. I think entrepreneurs by and large go with their gut, but their gut isn't just based on, I think the successful entrepreneurs, their gut is not based on hubris and vanity and ego only. I think their gut goes on just an awareness of what's happening around them at a macro level, at a micro level. Like for me, I always say, you gotta build a business, not just that you like. I mean, you have to like what you do. That's number one. But for me, it was also being in Montreal, I knew that, okay, let's say there's R&D tax credits here. And this was, even though when 10 years ago, there was no venture capital to speak of, but I think I give, the Real Ventures guy, for example, they changed the landscape of Montreal. Where now if you're an entrepreneur, you've got options. When I started, there were no options. But when I started to look at the landscape, I made a purposeful decision not to launch a tech startup. Because I said the R&D tax credits are going to make it where I can't compete with the Microsofts and the Googles when they come here and recruit tech talent. And, you're going to get all these VC backed firms poaching talent where it'll just be a lot of turnover. And that means quality of whatever we're developing will be inconsistent, because we'll be competing with these giants. So it wasn't just that I loved content and storytelling and was a media guy. It was that I said, you know what? I could see there being an opportunity where we could hire and create stable jobs for folks who are studying media. And in Montreal, there's not that many opportunities in the English media. So you could be fair to them, pay them, treat them well, give them a career path that they're going to enjoy. And you're not going to have what you have in New York, where, a guy who works at Vice gets poached to BuzzFeed, and then NBC hires him, and then ABC picks him up. And then within 3 years, he's worked 5 jobs, and it's good because he's kind of, has these sexier titles. But for the employers, it just means there's a lot of turnover and all that, right? So for us, strategy does come from just the macro aspect of not just what's happening in the world. Hey, digital is eating the world, and, online video is the future. And oh, look, YouTube is this dominant platform. It's also just about your surroundings, right? I mean, being in Montreal, I feel like also the culture doesn't lend itself well to the Mark Zuckerberg comes in, shuts the door and says, we're doing a week hackathon where we're going to just not sleep until we build this product. I mean, in Montreal, you say that, half your team is okay, it's 6:00. I have a date with my girlfriend. I have a baguette and a glass of red wine. I just want to chill. And that's fine. You have to understand, balance is good. And it's also because creativity is different. A coder could sit there and jam away code for 8 hours and then pass out. But I mean, if you're an artiste, creativity has ebbs and flows. And, it's I wrote one of my books in a month because I had thought about it for years. And then I said, I'm going to write it in a month. But then I couldn't write another book the next month. I was drained, So strategy does start from this awareness of the big macro backdrop. But then at the micro level, I feel like it has a lot to do with a company's life stage. What I mean by that is, when we started off, I would think of an idea in the shower or while driving and to work. And I would literally come in and say, hey guys, I got this idea. What do you think? And, I kid you not that sometimes a few hours later, it was alive and well, and it could be a dud or it could be a hit. Today, not just because there is an expectation of quality and consistency and whatnot from us, from our viewers, but also because we've gone out and hired more experienced people who are more methodical, they're more thoughtful, they're not just going to be knee-jerk reaction and do something. It is a lot more okay, guys, here's a few ideas we have. What do we do? Any other ideas? And there is a bit more of a consensus. Now, I've adapted, and that's what I mean. Before, it was just sheer willpower. It's a bit like when I said, come see me play soccer. Sometimes you have the ball, you make a pass, you get it, you steal it back, and you just kind of go through 5 defenders, and somehow you just find the will to score. And that's just, some people are going to kind of leave everything on the field a bit more. So earlier on, you could do that without rubbing your teammate the wrong way, because they were also kind of youngish and said, hey, this is great. This is why we like working here. Today, if I did that with the management team that we have, they'd be like, Ash is crazy. Like, tone it down. Like, have you thought of this or that? So today, it is a bit more consensus, pros and cons. What do we think? Here's a way. Let's budget it. Let's think it through. And you know what? That's why I think some entrepreneurs are just like, screw it, I'm leaving. I want to just be a serial entrepreneur, because they like that chaos at the early stage where you could just be a wild tiger. For me, it's taken it's been an adjustment, but it was something like studying business, reading about all these management, mumbo jumbo theories. You kind of knew that, okay, at some point you couldn't just through sheer willpower break through a wall. You had to go and take the time to find which door leads you to where you want to go.
Mm-hmm. So you've obviously had success and you're at a different life stage today with WatchMojo. What are your current priorities, like in terms of scaling the business, taking it to the next level?
Yeah. So, so last year was our 10-year anniversary. So I had a lot of reflection, and I kind of said, look, we could keep doing what we're doing and we could grow like at a slower and slower rate. And to be fair, it could even shrink, because it's naive to think things go to the right and up forever. Like, that's where I think a lot of entrepreneurs who maybe don't study like business and innovator's dilemma and things like that, I think sometimes they just drink their own Kool-Aid, where they're like, wow, we're adding this many monthly average uniques or users, or like, oh my God, software downloads or views going up. And they just assume it goes up forever. And it doesn't go up forever. And in fact, tech entrepreneurs are more vulnerable than media, because media, you actually don't have to be number one, so to speak. Whereas in tech, like, it's basically, if you're not number one or number two, there's not really going to be much of a, you're going to be squeezed out. So for us, I made the decision that, no, I don't want to just lean back and see the company float sideways. And I realized that the risk taking that I was taking earlier on had kind of subsided a bit, and I was a bit more conservative. So we made a conscious decision to say, look, I'm going to go back to more risk-taking mode and just place, I'm just saying, using an example number, I'm going to place 10 bets. Of these 10 bets, man, 5 of them will make no sense to an outsider. But you know what? WatchMojo didn't make any sense to an outsider for the first 5-6 years. 3 of them are going to be successful, promising. 2 of them are going to be, wow, triples or home runs. However, of those 2, I'd have the 5 that don't make sense. Maybe 4 are just total failures. And 1 is okay, but it makes no sense. But I said, maybe one of those things that doesn't make sense, if I go beneath the surface, will actually be the thing that in 5 years is going to be a home run, because the trends are all going there. So let's not rule those out necessarily. And then now at the other end of the spectrum, of the 2 things that seem like the home runs, one of them won't actually be sustainable, because it's kind of like maybe a lucky bounce, maybe an anomaly, maybe a loose end that somebody else figured out. Maybe also we never do like black hat bullshit stuff. Like I always go, it's like Warren Buffett says, you never know who's swimming naked till the tide goes down. So I always go like, yeah, like the reason why we focused on YouTube was because that's where the audience was. All these other companies were manufacturing views. They would just take a video, put it in a banner, put it alongside an article, autoplay that. And I was like, that's not a video. That's just the ad impression. And we never did
spam.
That. Yeah, it's spam. It's not filet mignon. It's spam, literally. So the way that I look at it now is we've made those bets. We basically placed 10 bets. And I'm actually now at like, it's funny because the new senior team, they saw me where, in a different way. Now they're seeing me like a bit more disciplined again, a bit more focused, a bit more critical, saying, okay, we did these 10 things. We really got to narrow down and kind of place a bet on 1, 2, or at most 3 of these things in the next phase. And hopefully another one could be this next big franchise. And that's your first question, is how, for example, Time Inc. grew into Time Inc. because Time Inc. launched with Time. Then they had Fortune. Then they had Life. And Life was their biggest hit. It was all images. But that has an actual shorter shelf life, because you can imagine at some point you have television and then images are less interesting, right? And then they had SI. And they grew into this Fortune, no pun intended, this empire out of the initial success of Time Inc. So last year, my conclusion was, is WatchMojo time or is it Time Inc.? And what is our fortune? What is our life? And that's something that at some point, it's also fine for some entrepreneurs to say, hey, there's no next act. That's it. I did my thing. I want to go sit on a beach. I'm going to go sit on a beach forever. I'm going to go sit on a beach for a weekend and still think about work kind of guy. So that's kind of the phase that we're in right now. It's kind of, we've made all these bets, whether it's live, whether it's some scripted stuff, whether, we did a game show, a few other things. It could also be platforms. It could be like, hey, we built a pretty dominant business on YouTube. Should we go on Twitter? Is Snapchat where we need to go?
Mm-hmm. What excites you the most right now for the future, right? It sounds like you have a myriad of options and you have a very interesting kind of strategic lens as to how you gauge opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, what I like is that you look at a lot of companies who are bigger than us and they have far more resources, but they're somewhat in no man's land. What I mean by that is, let's say they've raised capital, but they're not really making any money. And then they have like a board of investors who are actually rather impatient. So they're going to be forced to make some decisions, and a lot of them will be fine. A lot of them will make those decisions and will make the right decisions. But so long story short, what we have is, look, we don't have all the resources in the world, but that's actually good because that allows us to be a bit more focused and disciplined. But I actually have like 100-year lifetime perspective where I'm like, I'm not making decisions for WatchMojo to be 10 times bigger tomorrow. I just want WatchMojo to, in a healthy, sustainable, natural way, just become better and stronger over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year timeline. So that's what's good. And then the other thing is, our success did draw a lot of competitors. And a lot of entrepreneurs, I feel like, they drink their own Kool-Aid, they get a big head where they think like, oh, well, we invented the top 10 list. I'm like, no, we didn't. You had Dave Letterman, you had Wayne's World, you had the 10 Commandments. That was the original gangster. So for me, believe it or not, when I have like a colleague barge in saying, oh my God, these guys are I'm like, no, that's good. Like, it'll force us it allows me to push my team. Whereas if we didn't have any competition, it would be like, well, let's lean back and let's just be an autopilot. And that goes back to the initial style I had was a lot more driven, go, go, go. And once you get bigger, you kind of have to just not so much put the brakes on, but you can't be full metal to the pedal and throttle ahead. You have to kind of say, okay, but having competition actually allows you, and it forces you to go back to your team and say, no, guys, we have to every day get better. We can't accept, any complacency. So it's good, like every day there's like 10 things that bother me, but there's probably 20 things that I like. So you just have to have a bit of perspective.
Is there anything that keeps you up at night right now? Besides your kids?
Literally. I think it's just that there's this constant recalibration, with new people coming on, the company. I used to think for example, that like, Ash as a guy, forget being CEO, but like a guy who loves content, loves ranking, loves debating, like commenting on like the YouTube comments was like, it was cool. It showed that like we cared and it wasn't an act. I genuinely liked it. Same way I used to be the guy who used to work customer service for Visa, and I would take every call that came in wasn't a call to compliment us. It was a call by someone who was upset at the bank. And I loved each call because it gave me an opportunity to improve and amend. So I used to think that was good, but then I also realized, I'm like, Ash, wake up. You have 15 million subscribers. What are you doing sometimes? Dropping the gloves with like a 15-year-old gamer who's like bashing us for a pick. And I don't do that anymore, frankly. But my point is, you do have to kind of like become a bit more, aware of the perception. And I go, yeah, it's true. Like, so it's just that. It's this constant recalibration where you have to maintain some kind of balance because there's new people, new processes, new viewers, and you don't want to make decisions out of, stupidity, impatience, greed, or all those things. You got to let the baby grow up to a kid and then a toddler and then, a toddler, a kid, a teenager, and an adult. And that takes time.
Yeah, to switch gears and talk about a bit about the industry, because you've been obviously an industry veteran, going from more traditional all the way obviously now to WatchMojo with online video. What do you think is the biggest change that's happening right now that no one's talking about?
Well, okay, if I could start off the other way, I would say there's a lot of stuff that people are talking about, whether it's like VR or AR and bots and look, some of these things, like Google Glass from day one, I know Google, and look, Google is via YouTube is our biggest partner. So privately, I'll send them constructive criticism. Publicly, you would think I have no incentive to, pick on them. But I will say that, like, when they launched Google Glass, I was like, why are you guys going after a consumer market? Apart from like the super early adopter guy who's going to put this on and go to a bar and be asked to take it off, I'm like, to me, this is something a doctor would want. That's the main market. The doctor, you see a patient, you scan that mole versus 1,000 other pictures and you save a guy from cancer. I'm like, this is like, so my point was, they didn't want to go there because it wasn't sexy. I'm guessing. I'm not putting any words in their mouth. So maybe it wasn't sexy. Maybe because they're always thinking about how do we serve an ad before this experience. So that's, I guess, the thing that I feel is a lot of people are getting excited about things where, you've heard software is eating the world and AI is eating software, and maybe that's true. But until you could really dumb something down, like until YouTube dumbed down the video experience, online video was just a fad, and it was a possibility that we would never watch video on your desktop or your laptop or your mobile phone, let alone, your tablet. But that's what YouTube did. YouTube dumbed it down where it became kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. It's just automatically loads. There's no craziness. I don't have to download stuff. So I feel like right now, as an entrepreneur, when you are either you're an executive at an established company or an entrepreneur, you're going to hear a lot of fads. And ultimately, like, the holy grail is being able to dumb it down on a business or consumer side where it's a no-brainer. So now to answer your other question, which was what am I really thinking about? Yeah, I mean, look, I think for us, really tactically and not being too abstract, I won't lie. I think Facebook, with its 2 billion viewers, like users, I think does present an opportunity for WatchMojo to kind of double its reach and foothold. Clearly, we got 15 million subscribers on YouTube, and we have like 500,000 across our different channels on Facebook. So if we could basically replicate that, then that is another grand slam. It won't be easy, but that clearly for us is more so than AR, VR, all these things that are interesting and promising. That to me is like, it's there. It won't be easy, and it's already very cluttered. And there's really no money in it right now, but there was no money in it for YouTube either, and that's not what we make our decisions on. So that's probably the most.
Yeah. Do you think Facebook's going to figure it out? Like they're obviously investing a ton of resources, right? They announced Watch this week or last week.
So full disclosure, I am under NDA with Facebook, but I can say that we are starting to partner. Even NDA or not, confidential or not, I mean, it's more common courtesy. What I will say about Facebook is, at a general level, a few years ago, you remember, like, Mark Zuckerberg was all excited about Facebook Pay. And they tried it, and today if you search for Facebook Pay, you won't find anything. It's kind of it's disappeared, and they realize, okay, PayPal and eBay, or whoever else, they know what they're doing. With video, I think because of the sheer volume of users that they have, they will figure it out. It's more, what is the it? Is Facebook video the same kind of informational and entertainment programming that has become popular on YouTube? Maybe, maybe not. Could it just be more of a communications where I'm going to send a message via video to people who I know or follow, or, hey, here's my daughter, here's the latest video, my family here and abroad can see her. That's when the viewers decide. However, I do think, though, that the power of the feed, if you think just about that, right now you could go online and search for a Madrid hotel. When you go back on Facebook, within a second, you're going to be seeing 5 Madrid hotel options in your feed. So if over time you just connect the dots, you could imagine a very powerful discovery and recovery mechanism where Facebook's feed loads up a lot of videos that you actually are either have searched for, care about, or just based on what you're interested in makes sense. So I think Facebook will figure it out. What I think is realistic is it'll be a very different end game than YouTube. The economics may be different. The economics may suck. But to say that they won't have views, which they already do, is naive. I mean, it's a big platform, and it's going to be something big.
And just be respectful of your time. Maybe a few more last questions. Besides Facebook video, what else are you keeping your eye on in terms of like big shifts in the media space?
I think so. I think a big thing is the web does reward and is made for niche vertical experiences. So WatchMojo, when we started off, the original business plan called for video game content on Arcade Mojo and movie content on Flick Mojo and music content on Sound Mojo. Largely because we're so ahead of the game and we were trying to boil an ocean and we lacked resources. We just made the decision to go with WatchMojo and put all the videos there. And I think that made sense because after 2012, before 2012, we were doing everything. Fashion shows, video games, top 10s, interviews. And it was a mishmash of content. Since 2012, I think that made sense because it was basically, hey, it's top 10 lists around entertainment or infotainment. But I think where we are now is we do have to make this conscious decision, which is our vertical channel kind of strategy centered around language. For various reasons, I just felt like for now that made more sense. But I think at some point we have to ask ourselves, does WatchMojo, is it just one brand and that's it? Or do you actually have other verticals? And we're kind of like contemplating that through a myriad of options. And that's kind of like, the latest kind of discussions that we're having.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Ash. That maybe last question, where can people find out more about yourself or WatchMojo?
Sure. I'm not very hard to find and I'm pretty accessible. My email is ash@watchmojo.com. I don't mind sharing that. If people have a question, comment, valid constructive criticism, they can send it to me.
What's your tagline, right? The running out of ideas since
2006. Yeah, exactly. It's, if they want to reach out via LinkedIn or Twitter or any of those things, that's fine too. But email generally is best. And on that point, I think, for a while early on, I was actually a bit more active with other young entrepreneurs trying to help in any way that I could, make contacts. And then there was a time when it was wartime, and I was just in trenches and I kind of didn't have that much time. And now, just we have a bigger company and if there's a way that we could help other startups and growing businesses in any way, that's why we're here.
Great. Ash, thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.